professional life as the marine biologist for the state of New Hampshire, and 7 years as a field biologist, and then supervisor of fisheries research, and then supervisor of research, and then deputy director for special projects. And one thing I didn't mention, I in my tenure at Fish and Game, I worked for 11 different governors, and every one of the 11 tried to get rid of me. When I left, I was definitely Sununu. John Sununu is not a very nice person. One time I beat him at a environmental project, and he had me investigated by the Attorney General and the state police to see if I'd done anything illegal, and they had to fulfill the agreements that were made, much over Sununu's protest. They had to go through with it. They had a meeting of the effective department heads in Sununu's office with specific orders that I was not to be there. But the commissioner for DRED and the commissioner for Parks determined that I had to be there, so I was there. And Sununu came into the office and he said, "Who let that asshole in here?" And then he had to talk to me, but he spent the whole time with his chair facing the wall. He wouldn't look at me. Mother, which hobbled my abilities to do international work, so my consulting business was fading away at the time that I suffered a serious stroke and forgot most of everything that I knew, which made me kind of worthless as a specialist. But fortunately, over time, it's mostly come back.
Right, good. Can you just tell me something about, I know that with regard to Penny and Natalie and Susie, a lot of us are not so familiar with them because we weren't the same age and so on. Can you just tell me about how they sort of fit into your family and your life?
Well, it was, my father was apparently married 3 times, and my mother, the best that we can find out, was at least 5 and maybe more. She no longer remembered when I was trying to query on her. Her answer was that I must be a very nice person because all those men have married me. And I said, "Well, how many men?" And she says, "I don't know, but there were a lot." So,
this is Bunny you're talking
Bunny,
about.
yes.
Yeah.
And my father, with Mildred, had 1 child, Catherine Pendexter Spurr, and she is now the elder Spur of that generation. Before that it was Anne Friend. She was between Anne and Janet, and she is I think 82 in June, and she hasn't over time that much participated in Spur activities, although she still fondly remembers her summers in the farm in the 40s, which was well before our time because we started to be born in the 40s.
Yeah.
And one of my mother's marriages to a fellow named Gennaro, she had at least 2 children. One of them is Natalie.
Oh, okay.
Natalie Juliet Gennaro, and then my father, Ted Spurr, adopted her, so she's officially a Spur, and she did spend several summers at the farm, but she's always been a difficult person, and she left the family environment in the 50s to join the Women's Marine Corps, and she met her husband there and ended up in Colorado, and now she's in Oregon and completely wacko. Her brother, Sandy, I can vaguely remember when I was very little, and we lived in Marlow, New Hampshire, and then Sandy disappeared, and Penny has no knowledge of Sandy, and Gwenny, when Gwen and Janet were cleaning out the farm in Nottingham, sent me some pictures, and lo and behold, there's a picture in Aunt Dillis's writing from the 1940s with Eleanor, spelled with an I, not an E-A, and her children, and Natalie Gennaro and Sandy Gennaro, and there is a little blonde boy. So evidently I have a half-brother somewhere that I only remember from being when I was 2 or 3. So,
and then Susie too.
Susie and Cindy were full siblings. Susie was 22 months older than I, and Cynthia Marlowe Spurr was about 2 years younger than I, and she was Marlowe Spurr because she was born when we were living in Marlow. And she was one walking birth defect, and died when she was 8, and had minor little problems like born without a pancreas. And she developed, when she was 6 or so, she developed severe rheumatoid arthritis, and spent much of her time in a wheelchair with full casts on her arms and legs to prevent joint movement and huge pain. And 1955, when I was 10, my mother was bringing Cindy home from the hospital, and in the morning at 10 o'clock got hit by a drunk driver, and Cindy was, they didn't have seat belts then, and the dashboards were made out of steel, not padded, and was severely injured, and they just let her go. So, and Susie died in 1994 from cervical cancer at the age of 52.
Okay, good. Thank you. One thing I really wanted to ask you was about the museum that J.E. Spurr had. And in particular, can you just sort of rattle off what the contents were? Because that's something that I remember as a kid. And he had some incredible things in there, like this skin of the boa constrictor. Can you just sort of tell us what was in there?
Second story of the barn, and half of what was over the storage area with the 5-hole outhouse. And the 5-hole outhouse had 3 up and 2 down. The down ones were for children. And I can remember somebody getting all upset one time. Patty and I were in there doing what you're doing in the outhouse, and people got all upset that shouldn't happen. And the museum was divided into 5 parts, plus at the end was like a living room, which was where the boa constrictor skin was that our grandfather got in Nicaragua. And there was a Victrola, crank-up Victrola, and a whole bunch of 78s in a library. And then there was Ted's section and Bill's section, and all the way down through, and each individual son put their stuff in there. There was stuff, there was a pump organ.
I remember a blackjack. Was that from the Civil War? Or, do you remember that?
I don't remember blackjack, but there were several firearms. There were Uncle Steve from his college days, right over the stairs was a wood display board made out of section pieces of saplings of all the various different woods that you could identify them. There was a birch piece and a poplar piece and a white oak and a red oak. And he'd cut, they were in the round, and he'd cut a 45-degree angle, and he'd cut down through the middle, and then he shellacked them and put a label on them so you could see the wood grain of each piece. And
I remember some swords in there too. You remember that?
There was There was a cavalry model 1861 officer's sword. There was some bayonets.
Yeah, right.
There was somebody, I can't remember which brother, had a neat collection of weird mousetraps, of antique mousetraps, and they sat up on one of the beams there in a whole row of all these nifty mousetraps that looked nothing like modern ones, and made out of wire and cylinders with all kinds of gizmos. And there
was a carriage in there, wasn't there?
the carriage was out under Uncle Bill's study
Oh, okay.
on the dirt floor. That's where yeah, there was a carriage sitting there right under Uncle Bill's study, and then the play barn. There was this huge white and red rocking horse that we never could touch because it was Diana's.
Right.
We
right.
weren't allowed to use that rocking horse ever.
Yeah.
And then the swing was in the center beam, and then Patty and Bobby and I used to spend time walking on all the beams, and Bobby would do it blindfolded, and we thought that was pretty terrific. And then on the side to the west of the playroom in the barn was a shed that still had farming equipment back from the days when the farm was a real farm.
Yeah.
And there were out the back door of the barn from where the swing was, were the remnants, still when we were young, of a clay tennis court that my father and Uncle Jack had built.
I didn't know that.
It was a depression was still there, so at one time it had a tennis court back there.
And they must have had horses in the barn at some point, or
The barn was probably had horses, but and the shed thing that was full of junk were the original wood stanchions and stuff.
Huh.
And there was one of my jobs as a lad was to put the garbage cans on a wheelbarrow and trundle them out to the dump. There's a well-worn path going from the house. You go around the barn and out this path to the dump, and it had been used for so many years that it was just a rut. It's probably still there. But,
so they didn't have such a thing as a garbage man coming. You just had to take it.
No garbage man. And Austin Fletcher was the handyman, and
Yeah.
he used to come and shovel out the outhouses and start the plumbing up in the spring and shut it down in the winter, and 57, 58, we spent the winter there, and nobody knew anything about winterizing the farm, and the L was not used, and it wasn't heated, which was a mistake because it would have cost a lot of money to heat that.